And the history tells us that when they came together, February 21st, 1787, to begin to do some correcting of the Articles of Confederation, something happened that was not the intention of the gathered delegates. They came together to critique or to fix up this thing, so we'd quit fighting among ourselves and we'd have an instrument that would allow us to cooperate with each other and protect our different personal interests, but then we wanted a collective interest as a nation to be guarded and protected. So they came together in that day and that time and in that season for the purpose of making the nation strong. And so they gathered to try to fix up the Articles of Confederation. In the book Contending for the Constitution, it is quite a read because they talk about these individuals who had come together with their focus on the Articles of Confederation, did not understand that there was an invisible hand behind the process that was changing the agenda. And even though they had come in with one thing in mind, these men who were men of character and men of devotion and men that would most certainly do well for their nation, came to discover that the Articles of Confederation was not enough. And that was a great group of men that came together. 7 delegates had been state governors. 8 had signed the Declaration of Independence. 21 had fought in the War of Independence. And we had a number of them, almost 3/4 of them had already served on the Continental Congress or in the Continental Congress. 29 of the men were university trained, graduates of Harvard and Yale and Columbia and Princeton and William and Mary and Oxford and other prestigious schools. And among the men who were not university trained were the likes of George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. And these men came together to formulate something that would be an enduring document that would stand, because they knew that they had to have something better than what they had already created. As you read the history of those moments in contending for the Constitution, it became evident that it was a divided group that had numerous and several ideas, and it was a contentious gathering, and there were individuals that became friends and enemies all at the same meeting. There was times they had to come together and be reconciled to each other, but they were determined because they were men of dedication and of purpose. There's something about these individuals who gathered for that Continental Convention that I think would be a good idea for contemporary times. Most of those men, not most of them, all of those men came at their own expense. I think there's something to that. Hey, when you realize that Congress people make $174,000 a year, that's just in the House of Representatives. $174,000 a year. House of Representative offices budget is $3 million. $3 million for all these 400 and some odd people. They get $3 million a year. That's not all the other perks. And when you get to the Senate, you get $10 million a year office budget. I forget what their salary is. $250,000 for Nancy Pelosi. I really believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, if you told those folks you have to work for half the salary, many of Americans' problems would be over. But I dream. But as they roared, and as we look in this room there in Philadelphia, and these individuals came to fight and to debate and to argue, something began to happen. A new instrument began to come out of their discussion, and all of a sudden we have walked away from the concept of the Articles of Confederation, and now we're talking about a constitution. We're talking about an instrument that would speak to the will of the people. We're talking about something that would give the people the power to rule and make certain we never had kings again to tell us what to do. And because of great men like George Washington, who was in the room, who had an opportunity, as some of you know, to be a king, because after he had fought in the War of Liberation of 1776, and he was such a great leader. There were individuals that wanted him to be the king, but George Washington proved his greatness not in that he ascended to being a king, but he chose to retire back to his farm and become a citizen of this great land that was liberated. Wouldn't it be great if we had individuals going to Washington that would know that they were going there to serve, not turn it into a lifetime career? One of my greatest griefs when I got up on November 3rd, this past week or so ago, is John Dingle was still there. 77 years is just too much for another time, another story. But as these individuals, they came together, they fought, and they labored to give us this great document called the Constitution. And when they came out of the room, they knew it wasn't perfect. There were individuals who had some problems with it. They were not pleased with everything, but being that they were men that were visionaries, that they could look down the corridors of time and understand that they knew that man was a flawed creature, and there was the possibility that there were mistakes that needed to be corrected. You had individuals that stood and said, we have to have a collective, or we had to have a mechanism in this Constitution that would allow us to keep it right. We got those great things called the Bill of Rights, and these things have served our country well. And even the spirit of those that said, listen, we believe that we are forming a government of willing participants, and we know that we go into this mutually agreeing that the things that we're doing is by the consent of the majority. We have gone in to create one thing, we've come out with another. Providence has led us to and guided us in the process even when we weren't aware of it. And let me say this, there might be those that don't want to talk about the providential aspects of the birth of this nation, but you can't talk about America and try to leave God out, because it was God that ordained this nation, it was God that brought it forth, and it was God that orchestrated the affairs of those men gathered there in that room there in 1787. Even old Ben Franklin, the deist, who might not be looked upon by many in contemporary Christendom as being a real bona fide Christian, I beg to differ with you. I heard someone say the other day about Benjamin Franklin, well, I believe Benjamin Franklin showed a greater sense of piety than most professed Christians in America today. He had a sense of knowing when the gathering was deadlocked there in Philadelphia in 1787. He understood that if we're going to get past this log jam of disagreement, if we're going to escape this moment that is seemingly preventing us from doing what we have to do, he gave the great speech that said that we need to remember that when we first engaged being free, we prayed daily in this room that God would deliver us, and we saw God do it in the Revolutionary War, and the ragtag little American army, and George Washington became the victors, not because they had the biggest army, not because they had the greatest and the wisest of minds, not because they had a history of hundreds of years of military prowess, but they had a man named George Washington.